Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's Crime and Punishment story. This week I am covering the very strange case of Terrance Quinn and the murder of Martin Linskay, which took place in Newcastle Upon Tyne in 1863. I hope you will find it interesting. But before we begin, can I just say, if you do enjoy this video, then please give it a thumbs up. And if you are new here or haven't already done so, then do please consider subscribing to the channel to help support the content we create. Thank you. And I would just like to add, as I always do now, that I do record these stories live, so do sometimes make mistakes, which I always try to rectify, so I hope this does not spoil your enjoyment of the video. There is very little information about the early life of Terrance Quinn. He was said to be around 33 years old in 1863, so would have been born in around 1830. His parents are unknown, and it was said that he was born in Ireland. At the time the crime was committed, Terrance was working as a labourer in Newcastle. Martin Linskay, the victim, was born in around 1840 in Ireland, and his parents are also unknown. In 1861, he was living with his cousin Patrick Long and his wife in Gateshead, and in early 1863, Martin married Bridget Banks, and the couple were living in Sunderland and expecting their first child. Martin began working in Newcastle shortly before his death, and Bridget was expecting to move to Newcastle to live with him very soon. Martin was working as a miner near Scotswood and was living with one of his cousins, Martin Long, in Carr Street. On October the 3rd, 1863, Martin, his cousins and their wives all went to the local pub, the Parker's Arms, for a drink or two together before Martin left for Sunderland by train to visit his wife for the weekend. The evening went quietly and the men did not have much drink between them. On leaving the public house, Martin set off in the direction of the train station, and his cousins Michael and Patrick were going to the station with him. Martin walked a little behind them, smoking his pipe, and his cousins were chatting happily to each other as they wandered down the street. Two men were walking in the opposite direction. One was carrying a parcel of groceries, and they passed Michael and Patrick without issue, but for reasons unknown, Martin decided to knock the parcel out of the man's hands, and this led to the two men fighting. Martin, being the slightly stronger of the two, knocked the other man down on the ground twice, and on getting up the second time, the other man rushed at Martin, and his cousins heard him cry out that he had been stabbed. The cousins quickly ran to his assistance, and the other man ran off. The Longs, Martin's cousins, carried him quickly to the local chemist shop in the hope of getting help there, and the chemist told them to quickly take the man to Dr. Ellis 100 yards further down the road. But for some reason, the two cousins carried him over the road to another chemist shop, and this chemist sent for the doctor, who arrived almost immediately, and though he tried to do what he could, Martin Linskay died just a few minutes after his arrival. The police were called, and it was noted that the man who had attacked Martin had lost his hat, which the police found at the scene. And it was said that the hat was quite unusual, and it was hoped that along with the man's description, the hat might be recognised by someone. The man who had attacked Martin was described as being middle height with an Irish accent, and that his face was quite badly scarred by smallpox. The inquest was opened at Westgate Police Station, and at this point no one had been arrested for the murder, although some suspicion had fallen on a man by the name of Terrance Quinn. Bridget Linskay said she had identified the body as being that of her husband Martin. She said that until recently he had worked at Sunderland but had taken a job at Newcastle, and she had been about to join him there. She said they had only been married a short time and were expecting their first child. Michael Long said he was the cousin of Martin, and he had been living with him at Carr Street in Newcastle. He said on the night in question they had been to a public house near the cattle market in Newcastle. There had been a family group in the pub, and he did not believe that Martin had had more than 2 drinks before they left. On walking towards Newcastle Station, Michael said Martin was behind himself and Patrick. He said he saw the 2 men who passed in the opposite direction, but he did not take any notice of them. and he said that it was moments later that he heard Martin cry out that he had been stabbed. And on turning and heading back, Michael said a crowd had gathered round Martin, who he said was now lying on the ground. Michael then said he was a little confused as to what happened next. He believed that Martin had stood up and walked towards him, but he was not sure. And he did know that Martin had been taken to one chemist shop, but he was not sure about a second one. But he did know that he had cried out murder. He went on to say that he had not seen the two men fighting and did not know what had happened or who had started it, as he had his back to them at the time. The coroner then questioned him as to why he said Martin was on the ground, but then that he saw him walking, and Michael said he had been mistaken and that Martin had never been lying on the ground. Dr. Ellis said he had been called to the chemist shop of Mr. Jobson in Hine Street. He said he had arrived at 7:25, where he had found Martin in a pool of blood lying on the floor of the shop. He said there was very little could be done for him, and he had died at 7:30 p.m. exactly. He went on to say that he had yet to perform the post-mortem, but it was his professional opinion that Martin had died due to blood loss from the wound to his neck, caused by a sharp instrument which was most likely to have been a knife. At this point, the inquest was adjourned until an unknown date, as it was felt that this would allow the police time to catch the man responsible before it was resumed. And during this time, a man by the name of Mr. McGurk of Scotswood Road made a statement to the police that he had been in the company of a man by the name of Terrance Quinn on the night of the murder, and he told them that Terrance had been the man who had attacked Martin. And he also stated that Terrance had left Newcastle with, he believed, the intention of travelling to Ireland. And it would seem that Terrance Quinn had gone to Glasgow first, where he had sent a letter back to Newcastle. This letter was intercepted by the police, and they were then able to find out his location. And the Glasgow police were sent to arrest him on the charge of wilful murder of Martin Linskay. I did not find any details of a funeral for Martin Linskay, and it is quite possible that his wife may have taken him back to Sunderland for burial. However, I was not able to find any indication of a headstone for Martin anywhere in the area of Newcastle or Sunderland. The inquest was resumed on October the 12th at Manners Police Station, and for the benefit of Terrance Quinn, the previous witness statements were read out. Dr. Ellis was then recalled, and he said that he had now performed the post-mortem on the body of Martin Linskay, and he could confirm that the cause of death had been blood loss due to the wound to his neck. A wound, he said, that had been so deep it had penetrated the inside of his throat, causing further blood loss internally. Francis McGurk said he lived at Scotswood Road and was a friend of Terrance Quinn. He said they both worked at the Paradise Paintworks in Newcastle. He said on the night of the crime they had had a couple of drinks in a local public house, but neither of them were the worse for drink, and they had left the public house to head home at around 7 p.m. The last place they had called into was a shop in Pink Lane where Terrance had bought some groceries. He said on passing the first two men nothing happened, but when they reached Martin Linskay, Terrance spoke to him, saying something along the lines of having mistaken him for someone else. Francis said that Martin then knocked the parcel and Terrance to the ground. He believed that he had then kicked his parcel, though he could not be sure. He continued by saying that he had begun to pick up the items from the road, and as he was doing so, he heard a young boy who was standing close by say, "You rascal, you have struck the man, you should not have used the knife." He said Terrance then picked up his parcel and began looking for his hat, which he was not able to find, and he then ran off with Francis following him. He said that they then went to a public house where Terrance had 2 glasses of whisky before continuing on their journey home. He said that he did not see him again until the following morning when they were heading to St. Mary's Roman Catholic Church. By now he had heard that a man had been murdered, and he spoke to Terrance about this, saying to him, "Is that what you did last night?" And he said Terrance had replied, "It was nothing of the sort, I did not hurt the man enough to do that." And he said that after leaving church he did not see Terrance again. He then went on to identify the hat found at the scene as being very like the one that Terrance had lost. In fact, he believed it was most definitely his hat. Gabriel Headley said he lived in Arthur's Hill in Newcastle and had been in the area of Scotswood Road on the night of the murder with 2 other men. He said he had noticed the men fighting, and he also saw one man appear to be picking up groceries from the ground. He did not notice who had started the fight, but he did see another man, not Martin, hit the smaller man, who he now knew to be Terrance Quinn, around the back of the head. And after this, Terrance made a rush towards the other man, Martin Linskay, and one blow was struck, but he could not be sure if it was a fist or a knife. But later, when Michael Long took Martin away, he noticed a knife in the hand of the man Quinn. He said at this point he did not know that Martin had been stabbed, and he and his friends had helped Terrance to look for his lost hat, which they did not find. And a few moments later he said they heard someone shouting that a man had been stabbed, and they left to see who it was. But on turning back towards where the fight had taken, Gabriel said Terrance had now gone and was nowhere in sight. And when asked, he said he believed the knife that Terrance had been holding was an ordinary pocket knife. Isaac Armstrong and George Main, who had been with Gabriel, both gave the same evidence as the previous witness. George Wynne said he was in Scotswood Road on the night of the murder, and he had been standing near the corner of Ord Street. He said he had seen the man Martin Linskay being led away by 2 other men, and shortly after this he had seen 2 different men had passed him. One of those he now knew to be Terrance Quinn. He said he did not see a knife in his hand, but he heard the click of what to him sounded like a pocket knife being folded to be put into a pocket. Charles Jackson said he was 13 years old and lived in Dunn Street in Newcastle. He said he had been in the area on the night of the murder, and he said he had seen the fight take place between the men, and when the smaller man, Terrance, was knocked down the second time, he heard him cry out, "I will stab you." Charles said he saw him take the knife from his pocket and rush towards Martin, and he thought he saw him stab him in the neck, but after this he said he quickly turned and left as he did not want to see any more. Robert MacLeod said he lived near Scotswood Road and he had known Terrance for several years, and he said on the night of the murder Terrance had came to his house asking for a hat, as he said he had lost his. He said he did not think much of this and gave him a loan of one of his hats, and he then left and went on his way. Inspector Dixon said he had received information that Terrance Quinn was the man responsible for the murder of Martin Linskay, and he also had heard that he had left the area. He said he later received further information that Terrance was in Glasgow, and the Glasgow police were able to find him and keep him in custody until he was able to bring him back to Newcastle. He said that on his return to Newcastle he then charged Terrance with the willful murder of Martin Linskay, and Terrance made the following statement. "I was leaving Newcastle on October the 3rd, carrying with me a parcel of groceries. On passing 3 men, I bumped into them. I begged their pardon, but they knocked my hat from my head and knocked my parcel to the ground, and they tore my trousers. They then knocked me to the ground, and they ill-used me." He did not add anything further. The coroner then spoke to say that in his opinion there could be no doubt that Terrance Quinn had been the man who had struck the blow that led to the death of Martin Linskay, but was this murder or manslaughter? He said this was for the jury to decide, with the distinction between murder and manslaughter being murder was premeditation, which he felt was not present in this case. The jury at the inquest retired for 5 minutes before returning with a verdict of guilty of manslaughter, and Terrance Quinn was committed for trial. The trial took place at the end of November 1863, and it is possible that this was held at the Guildhall in Newcastle Upon Tyne. Terrance Quinn pleaded not guilty to the charge. A lot of the evidence at the trial was the same as that was given at the inquest, so I will only include the new information that was added at the trial. Bridget Linskay gave the same evidence as at the inquest, only adding that she felt that no man would ever take a knife to another without the intention to kill, and for this she would like to see justice for her husband, as she believed that Terrance had intended to kill him. Michael Long gave the same evidence as at the inquest, only adding when questioned that neither he nor Patrick Long had been involved in the fight that took place before Martin was stabbed. He stated that they had not knocked the hat from Terrance's head, nor had they hit him. He said, in fact, that they had been some distance away when the fight between Martin and Terrance took place. Gabriel Headley was also questioned on the same subject, and he said that he had not seen Patrick or Michael strike Terrance in any way. These questions were put to the witnesses based on the statement made by Terrance that all three men had attacked him. No statement from Patrick Long was ever recorded in the newspapers at either the inquest or the trial, and Terrance Quinn did not give evidence on his own behalf. The defence then spoke of this being an unprovoked attack against Terrance Quinn, who had simply been walking home with his groceries. Yes, he may have bumped into the men he passed, but nothing more. Terrance was a quiet, peaceful man who prior to this had always been of good character. He continued by saying that others may have been involved in the fight, though it seemed some were not willing to admit to this. And it was also possible that the wound may have been caused by another person, as Terrance did not seem to be aware afterwards that he had caused such harm. Terrance felt that these men who had attacked him were intending to do him serious harm, and he had struck out in self-defence, and the defence said he did not feel that this was a case of murder or manslaughter. Henry Sanderson of Robson and Company of Newcastle was then called to give a character witness for Terrance, and he stated that he was of excellent character and had never caused any problems in the workplace. The judge, in summing up, stated that the defence had suggested that there had been some doubts cast as to whether the fatal blow had been struck by the prisoner, and if the jury had any reasonable doubts because of this, then they should acquit the prisoner. And if they felt that the wound had been inflicted by the prisoner but it had been done in fear of his own life, then this may also be grounds to acquit him. However, if they felt he would not have been justified in believing his life was in danger and had struck the fatal blow, then the jury should find him guilty of manslaughter. The jury did not retire, only speaking amongst themselves for a very short time before returning a verdict of not guilty. The judge then stated that Terrance Quinn was a free man and would be discharged immediately. I did not find any further details of Terrance Quinn after this. Although many options came up in my searches, none could be 100% proven to be the same man. But it is to be hoped that he was never involved in such a case again. I was also sadly unable to find any further details of Martin Linskay's widow Bridget and their unborn child. Each week I say this case has been a strange one, and this is almost always true, and none more so than this week's. Was this really a case of more than one man attacking Terrance and for no reason? Or was this really just two men involved in a fight that went terribly wrong? It's hard to know for sure, as it seems to be only Terrance that stated that all three men attacked him. And if it was Terrance who struck the fatal blow with the knife, was he justified in doing so as he was in fear of his own life? I have to admit that on that one I agree with Martin's wife. Surely no one would think using a knife would not result in such serious consequences as possibly the death of the other person. Were the jury right to find him not guilty? That is a hard one to answer, as he was clearly at the scene, and he was seen with a knife in his hand by witnesses, and he had been fighting with Martin. But did he stab Martin, or was it someone else? I don't actually know what I would have thought if I had been on the jury at the time. But what do you think? Do you think he was guilty of manslaughter, or do you think he was rightly found not guilty? Do you think that more than two men were involved in the fight, or was it truly just Martin and Terrance? Do please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I do hope that you have found this sad and tragic story interesting, and I do thank you all very much for watching, and I do hope to see you all again very soon.